Night gathers slowly over forgotten kingdoms, the air moving like breath, deep, unhurried, familiar. Somewhere a candle trembles in its glass, and the world of stone and shadow begins to remember itself. Beyond the noise of time, there once were halls where power spoke softly. No drums, no fanfare, only footsteps across marble, parchment sliding beneath a quill, the slow closing of a heavy door. Here, history did not shout, it exhaled. Kings ruled in the space between words, their crowns gleaming not with gold, but with silence. If you listen, you can almost hear them still. The rustle of robes against cold walls, the hush before judgment, the long pause between decision and decree. Each breath was ceremony, each moment a weight carried with care. The night stretches further now. Through the corridors of memory, the echoes drift. John of England, patient and uncertain. Charles of France, lost between clarity and dream. Voices of command softened by distance. They ruled as men always do, imperfectly, briefly, then surrendered their noise to time. Tonight we return to that stillness, not to the wars or the glory, but to the quiet endurance that remains after both have gone. So close your eyes, let the halls fade in around you, and let history breathe once more, gently, endlessly, into sleep. The quiet thrones of the Middle Ages, the halls of quiet power. Night gathers softly over the old kingdoms. Within the walls of stone and torchlight, history moves not with noise, but with breath. The sound of footsteps on marble, the rustle of robes, the slow closing of a great wooden door. These are the sounds of power as it once lived. In the long echo of royal halls, kings ruled not in grandeur, but in waiting. Their crowns pressed down not only gold, but silence. Decisions came slowly, carried through corridors by whispers and parchment. The air held a quiet weight, not of fear, but of awareness, as if every sound might awaken time itself. King John of England once walked here, his presence sharp and deliberate. He was not a man of patience, yet patience was demanded of him. His reign was heavy with conflict, the pull between crown and people, oath and survival. He signed papers that bound the future long after his hands had turned to dust. In his world, authority was a tide, rising, falling, always returning to its source. What remains of him now is not his anger, not his wars, but the quiet endurance of an idea. That law can outlast the man who writes it. Far from England's damp castles, another ruler drifted between clarity and confusion. Charles VI of France, known once as the Mad, lived in a palace that shimmered with beauty and despair. There were days when he spoke gently, clearly, when his eyes caught the light and the court felt safe. And then there were nights when he forgot his own name, when the torches flickered too brightly and the world turned unfamiliar. He ruled in intervals of awareness, his reign a fragile bridge between two silences, one of mind and one of history. Even in madness there was rhythm, even in weakness there was stillness. His memory remains not as tragedy, but as tenderness, a reminder that power too is human. To the south, under the heat of Castile, another king carried love and cruelty in equal measure. Peter of Castile ruled as both flame and shadow. His anger was swift, his affection deep. He loved fiercely and punished quickly. The halls that once trembled at his approach now lie quiet, the stones breathing evenly again. The echoes of his laughter, his fury, his longing, all have been softened by time. What endures is not his wrath, but the trace of passion that shaped his brief, relentless life. There is a stillness that follows kings, a long exhale after centuries of command. The world moves on, but their voices fade into the same air that once carried their decrees. In England again, Edward II stands in shadow. His crown sits uneasily, tilted by desire and defiance. He ruled not by strength, but by the heart, and in doing so, he lost both. His love for a companion, forbidden and bold, brought whispers into the corridors that could not contain them. His end came quietly, as such things often do, but his name lingers, not in triumph or scandal, but in the echo of a man who tried to live truthfully in an age that feared truth. Further east, Wenceslaus of Bohemia reigned with a cup always near his hand. He laughed loudly, celebrated freely, and found comfort in taverns more than thrones. His people loved him, then grew weary of his indulgence. He was less a ruler, more a reflection of his times, a man of appetite and fatigue, caught between duty and drink. In the end, his laughter quieted, and only the warmth of his humanity remained. Then there was Henry VIII, a man whose decisions rippled far beyond his lifetime. He moved through palaces heavy with desire, ambition, and consequence. Wives came and went, alliances formed and fractured. The shape of his reign was a storm. Yet when the noise of his rule faded, what remained was transformation. The world he left behind was different, reordered, redefined. He is remembered not for calm but for change, and yet even his story has softened with age. The sharp edges of his choices have worn smooth under the centuries, like stones in the river of time. Across the Channel, Francis I of France adorned his kingdom with beauty. He built halls filled with light, invited painters and poets to speak where generals once stood. He loved not only the art of rule, but the rule of art, how colour and form could steady the spirit of a nation. In his reign, there was music, there was laughter, and beneath it all, the same slow rhythm of endurance. And then Philip IV, a king of precision, of order, of distant calm. He ruled with silence sharper than words, every decision measured, every gesture deliberate. He believed in the weight of structure, in the quiet dignity of control. In his gaze, the world was organized, not conquered. Where others sought glory, he sought balance. And when his reign ended, it did so without storm. Simply another page closing, another crown laid to rest. Now the centuries have folded over these names, their crowns have dulled, their kingdoms dissolved into maps and museums. What remains is gentler than memory, a breath within the fabric of time, a hum beneath the noise of history. They are no longer kings nor men of legend, but voices carried softly through corridors of stone and light. The halls they walked still stand, though quieter now. Dust gathers where banners once hung. The air smells of wax and rain, and the echoes of their footsteps blend into the rhythm of the earth turning slowly. Here, in this quiet after centuries, their power feels distant, almost tender. Not command, but endurance. Each life, once fierce, now reduced to a whisper. Each choice, once immense, now folded into calm. The walls remember their breath, their silence, their stillness. And so, the kings of the Middle Ages rest not in triumph or tragedy, but in balance. Their stories no longer demand attention. They have become part of the greater quiet that holds the world together, a reminder that even power, in the end, becomes peace. Top of form, bottom of form, top of form, bottom of form. The last light of the crowns. Beyond the early monarchs, others followed, rulers shaped not only by ambition, but by longing, exhaustion, and the slow patience of survival. Their crowns still caught the light, but it was a softer glow, less command, more endurance. Edward II of England walked the long corridors of Windsor and Westminster, a man bound more to his heart than to the weight of his title. He trusted too deeply, loved too openly, and in a world built on silence and restraint, that openness became a quiet undoing. When his exile came, there were no speeches, no shouts of rebellion, only the sound of hooves on wet ground, the slow rhythm of departure. He vanished into the mists of history not as a conqueror, but as a figure of gentle defiance, a reminder that tenderness, too, can be dangerous. The centuries have blurred his name, but somewhere in the stone and rain of England, the air still holds the faint memory of his leaving. Further east, under the softer skies of Bohemia, King Wenceslaus IV lived a life of appetite and laughter. He ruled as he breathed, freely, unevenly, a man who loved wine, warmth, and conversation more than ceremony. His crown sat askew, his throne was often empty. He found comfort among commoners, in the smoke of taverns, in the hum of songs sung without formality. The court whispered of his negligence, but history remembers him with a kind of weary affection. He was not cruel, only human, too alive for the stillness that crowns demand. When he died, there was no grand mourning, only the hush that follows a storm finally spent. Across the narrow seas, the great weight of kingship shifted again. Henry VIII of England strode through his palaces with purpose, his will vast, his choices absolute. He changed kingdoms, altered faiths, and shaped the future through decisions both personal and irrevocable. His voice once filled these same halls with command, but time has thinned it to an echo, a murmur beneath centuries of quiet. Now his image in portrait seems less fierce, more tired, a man gazing past his own legend. The noise of his reign has been absorbed by the calm that followed. Where there was once the clang of armor and argument, there is only still air, holding the faint warmth of a life that burned too brightly. In France, the tone softened. Francis I brought gentleness to his courts, inviting poets, painters, musicians, voices that could turn silence into something tender. He filled his chambers with color and conversation, believing that beauty was its own form of order. The halls glowed not with gold, but with light. Music moved through the air like breath. He understood that a kingdom could be built not only with armies, but with ideas, with calm, with grace. And though empires have risen and fallen since his time, the mood he created, that serene balance between strength and refinement, still lingers in the quiet spaces of France, in gardens, in galleries, in the patience of art itself. Then came Philip IV, the king of measured silences. Where others ruled with passion, he ruled with control. His words were few but deliberate. He believed that stillness was the purest form of strength. His court mirrored his restraint, clean lines, muted colors, ordered space. To some he seemed distant, to others steady. He embodied an age that sought stability more than splendor, discipline more than display. Under his rule, the kingdom did not roar, it breathed. And when he was gone, his legacy did not crumble or cry out. It simply faded like the final tone of a bell carried away by the wind. Now all of them, John and Charles, Peter and Edward, Wenceslaus, Henry, Francis and Philip, rest within the quiet chambers of history. Their palaces have grown cold. Their portraits hang in the half-light of museums, eyes gazing toward centuries they could never imagine. Their voices, once commands, are now soft fragments of memory carried in dust and glass. The weight of their crowns has lifted, their ambitions reduced to calm echoes that travel no further than the walls that once enclosed them. Each of their reigns, once urgent, has become part of the same long breath of time, one drawn slowly in and exhaled gently across the years. Their triumphs, their failures, their passions, their madness, all have been evened out by the quiet rhythm of history. The anger of kings becomes patience, the noise of court becomes the hum of air in old corridors. Only the faint scent of wax and parchment remains, the soft texture of age itself. Outside, the seasons continue as they always have, rain against stone, sunlight over gardens long abandoned. Birds settle on parapets where banners once flew. The world moves forward, but these names, these lives, remain behind, resting in the still corners of time. Now their stories are less about rule and power and more about endurance, the way presence itself can linger after the sound has gone. They are not lessons, not warnings, not myths. They are memories smoothed by patience. The crowns that once gleamed have dimmed, but in their dimness there is a quiet beauty, the peace that follows after centuries of struggle. In the calm that history leaves behind, one truth continues, that power, once spent, returns to silence, and that every throne, no matter how grand, eventually becomes a place of rest. Top of form, bottom of form. Top of form, bottom of form. The knights and their quiet fall bottom of form. The Order of the Temple. Across the wide seas and the quiet deserts of the old world, there once stood a brotherhood of still hearts and deliberate hands. They were called the Knights of the Temple, men bound by vow, guardians of travellers, and keepers of the long and perilous roads. They were not kings, nor priests, nor merchants. They were a bridge between all three. Their task was simple, though their lives were not: to bring safety where there was danger, to build order in the midst of uncertainty, to keep watch as others slept. In the beginning there were only a few. Riders gathered in the dust outside Jerusalem, men without family, but not without purpose. They had come from distant lands, drawn by the same quiet promise, that a road could be made safe, that a weary pilgrim could walk without fear. They took no glory for themselves. Their clothes were plain, white wool marked with a red cross. Their houses were simple, stone walls, low light, the sound of wind through corridors. Their speech was measured, their gestures modest, but in their silence lived something vast, a discipline that did not waver. Each dawn began the same way, the sound of bells, the opening of the gates, the soft creak of saddles and armor being lifted once more. They rode into the open land, through valleys where the air shimmered with heat, past wells and ruins and the dry breath of the wind. To the travelers they met, they were reassurance in human form, a symbol that someone still cared for the roads that stretched beyond the horizon. At night, their camps glowed faintly under the stars, fires burned low, ringed by men cleaning their blades, speaking little, eating slower still. The sound of steel and leather, the scent of ash and oil, the steady rhythm of routine. This was their prayer. Their strength did not come from the sword, but from repetition, from doing the same thing each day with unwavering purpose. In distant lands they built fortresses that seemed to grow directly from the earth. Some stood on cliffs above the sea, where gulls cried and waves struck the rock with endless patience. Others rose from desert plains, great towers of pale stone surrounded by silence. No banners fluttered there, no songs were sung, only the wind and the steady heartbeat of men who had chosen endurance over comfort. Their walls were more than defense, they were memory. Each block carved by hands that would never see home again. Each corridor shaped to hold both the sound of footsteps and the weight of stillness. Within those walls, life followed rhythm instead of emotion. Work, rest, guard, repair, pray. Each task done not for reward but for the simple reason that it must be done. The knights of the temple kept records, though they wrote little about themselves. They built treasuries, managed lands, guided trade. Golden letters passed through their hands like water through stone, never held for long, always moving toward purpose. They understood that wealth, if used well, could protect more than swords ever could. And so the roads prospered. Merchants crossed the continents under their watch. Villages grew near their fortresses. Peace, fragile, temporary but real, took shape in the shadow of their discipline. In every corner of their world, the same emblem marked their presence, the red cross on white. It did not mean conquest, it meant order. A signal that somewhere beyond the noise of empires there were still men who valued balance over power. Their discipline was both armor and chain. They followed their rules with precision, but within that precision there was a kind of peace, the certainty of knowing one's place in the pattern of things. When they trained, it was not to destroy but to remain steady. When they fought, it was not for glory but for necessity. Even in battle, they moved with the same composure as in prayer, measured, quiet, unbroken. In time, their influence spread far beyond the sand and stone that birthed them. Across the seas, in Europe's cold cathedrals, their name carried weight. They were trusted to hold coin, to carry messages, to protect secrets. Their houses became resting places for pilgrims and nobles alike. Their networks, roads, fortresses, ledgers, formed a skeleton of stability across continents. Through their patience, order itself became tangible. For a time, they seemed unshakable. Their walls glowed in the morning sun. Their rules held. Their brothers continued their endless rhythm of duty. But nothing in the world remains untouched by time. Even stillness begins to shift when the air changes. As kingdoms grew restless and crowns grew jealous, the balance began to tilt. The power they had built, not from ambition, but from trust, became a shadow that others feared. Their silence was misread as secrecy, their precision mistaken for pride. And so quietly, suspicion began to gather like dust before a storm. Kings who once sought their counsel now sought their downfall. Letters were written, accusations prepared. It began not with battle, but with rumor. Whispers in the courts, words shaped to plant unease. Slowly, the tide turned. The guardians of peace became prisoners of doubt. But that part, that slow unraveling, belongs to another hour of the night. Here we stay with them in their stillness, before the decline, before the fire. We remain in the light of their purpose, in the calm that defined them more than their end. In their time, the knights of the temple represented something rare, a belief that discipline could be its own form of peace. That to serve quietly was to live with meaning. Their strength was not in their swords, but in their refusal to break the rhythm of their duty. And so long as they followed that rhythm, the world around them seemed, for a moment, steady. Their fortresses now stand in ruins, walls half buried by wind, stones scattered like memories. But even in decay they retain their balance. The arches still hold. The corridors still whisper when the wind passes through. The silence within them feels deliberate, as though it has chosen to remain. If you were to walk there now, you would find the same quiet the nights once knew, the same dry air, the same weight of purpose suspended in time. There are no guards at the gates, no banners on the walls, only the still breath of centuries. And if you listened closely, you might hear the faint sound of footsteps, not ghosts, but memory, moving softly over stone. The order of the temple has long since faded, their name absorbed into the calm of history. But what they built remains. Roads that connect, ideas that endure, a pattern of life shaped by intention. Their discipline became the blueprint for endurance itself. In their absence, the world has grown louder, but somewhere within that noise, their silence continues. A reminder that the truest kind of strength is not in conquest, but in constancy. So now, as the night deepens and the centuries unfold like pages, their image lingers, not in firelight or battle, but in the steady rhythm of still hands, in the quiet hum of work done well, in the peace that follows after order is made. The Knights of the Temple remain, not as warriors of faith, but as symbols of equilibrium. Men who once believed that calm was a kind of armor, and that endurance, in the end, was victory enough. Top of form, bottom of form, top of form, bottom of form, top of form. The quiet fall. But all things in time begin to shift. No order stands forever. Kings rise and fade, crowns change their weight and shape. The tide of favor drifts, subtle as wind moving through sand. The Knights of the Temple had stood too long, too steady, too certain. Their silence, once admired, began to make the powerful uneasy. The calm discipline that had built trust now became a mirror, reflecting how uncertain others felt in its presence. Whispers began quietly. In courts lit by candlelight, men leaned closer and spoke of secrets, of treasures hidden, of vows broken in private. No one could see the whole picture, but the story grew in the spaces between words. Letters were written, seals pressed into wax. Each document carried more weight than the truth it contained. Some were signed by trembling hands, others by those who understood the silence between accusation and intent. The campaign against the Knights began not with armies, but with language. A word, once spoken, can outlast a sword. At first, the order continued as it always had. The fortresses still opened their gates at dawn. The riders still set out on their routes, their banners steady in the morning light. They trusted their purpose more than the shifting moods of kings. But slowly, the world around them began to turn. Royal messengers carried decrees sealed in crimson. Edicts called for arrest, for inquiry, for the quiet dismantling of a brotherhood that had once guarded the realm. The accusations were written in formal ink. Words like heresy, words like corruption, heavy words that could bend even the strongest walls. The Knights did not rise in rebellion, they answered with stillness. They opened their doors when the soldiers arrived. Some believed the truth would defend itself. Others simply accepted that all orders, in time, must pass. In Paris, on a grey morning, the first prisoners were taken. Armour was removed, hands were bound. The same stone halls that had once echoed with discipline now held the soft sound of footsteps in chains. Their leader, Jacques de Molay, stood quietly beneath the vaulted ceiling of the palace. He spoke with calm words, his voice low but steady. There was no plea, no protest, only acknowledgement, as if he already knew that silence would outlive accusation. Outside, the city continued its life. Markets opened, children played, smoke rose from bakeries into the pale sky. The end of an age passed quietly, almost unnoticed. The trials were long and slow, questions repeated, confessions drawn, names crossed from records. Many recanted, then recanted again. The truth dissolved beneath the weight of repetition. It was not a battle fought with swords, but with words worn thin by fear. When the fires came, they did not roar. They burned as they always had. Brief, bright, and final. The men who once carried the cross upon their cloaks now stood beneath a sky that refused to remember them. Flames rose, then settled into ash. The crowd watched, then drifted away. And the calm that followed was greater than any victory could have been. The fortresses too began to empty. In the deserts, the wind moved through broken towers. In the forests, moss climbed the stones that once held banners. Ships once carrying their seal now carried nothing but cargo. The Red Cross faded from sight, but not from memory. The years that followed were quiet. Their lands were taken, their titles erased, their symbols scattered. But the roads they built remained. The routes of travel, the lines of trust, those could not be undone. Merchants still followed their paths. Villagers still lived near the ruins of their walls. The pattern they had carved into the world was too deep for any decree to remove. And so the order of the temple passed into another form, not destruction, but transformation. Their name became legend, their silence became myth. Stories whispered that they had hidden treasures or escaped across the seas or lived on in secret brotherhoods. Perhaps none of it was true, but truth was no longer their concern. They had become something gentler, a memory shaped by imagination. Centuries turned, the fires that had ended their order cooled to dust. Grass grew where the towers once stood. In time, even the stones lost their edges. But the mark they left, a sense of balance, of structure, of calm purpose, endured quietly in the cultures that came after. Bankers, scholars, architects, many unknowingly followed the same rhythms the knights had lived by: discipline, patience, precision. These became their invisible legacy, the unseen continuation of order through ordinary life. Somewhere in an archive, a fragment of parchment still bears their symbol, a red cross fading into cream-colored fiber. It carries no weight now, no command, only the faint breath of history. It is a reminder that what is lost can still remain, that endings can become another kind of permanence. Their story survives not in triumph or tragedy, but in endurance, a quiet endurance that belongs to all things built with care. Even their downfall carries that same rhythm, measured, inevitable, and strangely serene. The knights, once bound by vows of obedience, are now bound only by remembrance. Their seal appears in old books, their names in half-erased ledgers, their presence in the architecture of trust itself. Wherever there is structure, wherever discipline meets compassion, the spirit of their order flickers faintly, like light through dust. They are not gone. They have only stepped aside, into the stillness that follows duty, into the part of history that hums rather than speaks. Theirs is the peace that comes when purpose has been fulfilled. A silence that does not end but simply changes shape. And so when one walks the ruins of their old strongholds, the air still feels deliberate. Each stone sits where it must. Each shadow falls where it should. Time moves differently there. Slower, deeper, older. It is not haunted, it is held. The quiet that remains is not emptiness, but completion. The order of the temple, the builders of roads, the guardians of pilgrims, the keepers of the delicate line between chaos and calm have found their final station, not in fire, not in fame, but in stillness. History keeps them gently as one holds something fragile, finished and remembered. Top of form. Bottom of form. Top of form. The stone heart of Paris. Bottom of form. The rise of stone. Beneath the pale and restless skies of Paris, something vast began to take shape beside the river. At first, it was only scaffolding and dust, a forest of wooden beams, a hum of voices rising with the dawn. The city around it moved in its ordinary rhythm, boats gliding across the Seine, market stalls opening, bread baking in the heat of the ovens. But near the island's heart, a new rhythm began, the quiet labor of stone meeting purpose. It did not happen quickly. Nothing of meaning ever does. The first stones were laid as prayers more than plans. The masons marked their lines with chalk, their hammers sounding like slow heartbeats. Each blow of the chisel released dust that glittered in the sun, as if the light itself approved of their patience. They worked without the promise of seeing it finished. They knew the walls they raised would outlast them, that their hands would become memory long before the final arch was placed. And yet they continued, generation after generation, lifting the same dream upward. The cathedral rose not as a monument to power, but as a conversation with time. It asked for no speed, only precision. The foundation was not just earth and stone, but faith in continuation. The belief that even when one life ended, another would take up the same task with equal care. Every figure carved into its walls carried a story. The angels and saints, the beasts and vines. They were not only decoration, they were language. Each face held the quiet mark of its sculptor, the trace of a moment when hand and stone understood one another. High above, the roof began to form its gentle curve. Ribs of limestone met like the branches of a tree, creating a canopy of balance and light. To stand beneath it was to stand inside a thought made solid. In time, glass joined stone. The windows were small at first, simple circles filled with faint color. But as skill grew, so did the ambition. Blue deepened to oceanic depth. Red burned like embers in evening air. The glassmakers melted sand and metal, mixing them with care and breathing life into the light. When the first rays of morning passed through, the walls themselves seemed to awaken. Inside, the air shimmered. Dust floated like gold. Every movement of the sun became part of the cathedral's design. It was not a building meant to be seen in stillness, but one that changed with the hours, its colors shifting, its shadows turning, as if the sky and the stone had learned to speak to one another. Outside, the sounds of construction filled the years. Wooden cranes creaked, ropes strained, and men shouted softly over the wind. Children grew into workers, workers became old, and new ones arrived to take their place. The rhythm never stopped. It pulsed through the city like a second heartbeat. The great towers began to rise, not as symbols of authority, but as extensions of the earth reaching gently toward the heavens. Each tower balanced the other, each weight met by counterweight. The geometry was precise, but the feeling was human. The sense that effort, when sustained, becomes something greater than will. Those who built it left little record of their names. They did not carve them into stone or speak them into song. They worked quietly, content to be forgotten, knowing that their work itself would remember them. In this there was no sadness, only acceptance. They were part of something that moved beyond the reach of individual time. As the cathedral took shape, the city began to bend around it. Streets led toward its doors, markets gathered near its walls. It became a compass for both body and spirit, a point to measure distance, a center around which life revolved. To those who passed each day beneath its rising arches, it was not only a place of worship. It was a part of the landscape, as familiar as the river, as constant as the seasons. Even unfinished, it offered calm, the sense that within its growing structure something eternal was already complete. Years became decades, decades became centuries, and still the work continued. The cranes remained, the scaffolds shifted. Each generation added a little more light, a little more height, a little more care. The bells arrived last. They hung in the towers like waiting hearts. Each one had a name, and each name carried a wish. They did not ring until the day the towers were ready to hold their sound. And when they did, the voice of the cathedral entered the world for the first time. The city stopped to listen. The air trembled, the sound rolled down the river and over the rooftops, reminding everyone who heard it that patience had found its reward. Yet even when the building stood complete, it did not stop growing. Its stones shifted with the weather. Its colors deepened with the passing of centuries. It aged as living things do, not with decay, but with presence. Visitors came and went. Some prayed, some simply stood and breathed. All felt the same slow weight of peace. To step inside was to step into another rhythm, one that paid no mind to clocks or seasons. It was never a monument to perfection. It was a portrait of endurance, a structure made of patience, a harmony between craft and time. Even now, when the sky changes over Paris and the river mirrors its light, the cathedral seems to breathe. Its towers watch, its walls hold the echoes of 1,000 songs once sung. What began as dust and labor has become something quieter, a shape of human persistence, grown not through force, but through the gentle insistence of care. And if you stand by the river at dawn, as the light spreads across the city's grey stones, you can still see the cathedral rising, not with movement, but with memory. Each stone remembers the hand that placed it. Each shadow remembers the hour it was cast. The building, like the people who built it, belongs to time and to the slow grace of becoming. Top of form, bottom of form, top of form. The endurance of light. Centuries turned. The city that had once been a collection of stone and sound began to change its skin. New buildings rose where gardens had been. Bridges spread like veins across the river. The language of Paris shifted, syllables smoothing, meanings evolving, but through every transformation the cathedral remained, still, observant, patient. It did not resist time, it absorbed it. Its walls, once pale, darkened with the breath of rain and smoke. Its towers gathered dust from passing centuries the way trees collect rings. Every storm that swept the city left a trace, and every dawn polished the same stones with light again. The cathedral had become more than a structure. It was a listener. It had watched empires rise in noise and collapse in silence. It had seen revolutions pass beneath its arches, crowds shouting, banners waving, boots striking cobblestone. It had heard the echo of cannon and the whisper of prayer, the same space holding both fury and hope. When processions moved through the square, their voices bounced gently from the carved facades, turning even chaos into rhythm. And when peace returned, as it always did, the air around the towers exhaled, and the bells resumed their slow conversation with the wind. Years of calm followed years of unrest. The seasons folded over one another until memory became landscape. There were winters when the Seine froze, and the cathedral stood surrounded by quiet white. There were springs when blossoms drifted across its steps like pale confetti. There were summers when the air shimmered with heat and the sound of bells carried across the sleeping roofs. Inside, the air was cool and constant. Even when the city outside changed its rhythm, the interior light remained unchanged. The slow turning of color through glass, the long shadows cast by columns that had not moved in centuries. The world outside hurried, but within these walls time continued its softer pace. There were years of neglect. Moss grew thick along the northern walls. Dust gathered on the pews where choirs once sang. The great doors closed more often than they opened. Pigeons nested in the towers. Ivy crept along the gutters. The building waited not as ruin but as memory, a sleeping witness beneath a restless sky. Yet even in those quiet, forgotten years, the light endured. At dawn, it still filtered through the rose windows, turning the dust to gold. At dusk, it still painted the floor with shifting mosaics of red and blue. The glass held its color, and the color held its patience. The cathedral had learned how to exist without attention, to rest inside its own endurance. Then came renewal. The people of the city, drawn by a feeling more than an idea, looked up once more. They saw what they had nearly forgotten, how light could live inside stone, how silence could contain meaning. Hands returned to repair what time had worn. Brushes cleaned the sculptures, chisels freed details buried under soot. The work was slow, but it was filled with care, a conversation between the living and the lasting. When the scaffolding came down again, the towers breathed. The carved figures regained their faces. The gargoyles looked out once more over a city they had never left. And as they did, the bells began to sound again, not as command, but as acknowledgement, a gentle answer to the sky. Through wars and rebuilding, through loss and renewal, the cathedral's rhythm remained unchanged. It did not belong to any single century. It belonged to continuity itself. Its stones had become part of the city's heartbeat, and its silence had become the measure of calm. The people who came inside did so for many reasons: to pray, to rest, to see the light, or simply to breathe in the echo of something older than themselves. They all walked more slowly once they crossed the threshold. The air demanded it. Sound softened. The floor, worn smooth by countless steps, seemed to remember them all. Each visitor another brief passage through the long patience of stone. At midday, light struck the upper windows and spread like water across the nave. It moved slowly, pouring from one wall to another, tracing the same journey every day, as if rehearsing eternity in small gestures. At night, when the doors were closed and the square was empty, the towers stood like sentinels over the sleeping city. The bells hung motionless, their metal dark and silent. But even in stillness, they were part of the rhythm, the quiet between notes that gives shape to sound. Sometimes, during storms, lightning revealed the carvings in sharp relief. Saints and kings and creatures suspended in sudden brightness. Then the thunder followed, deep and slow, rolling across the rooftops like the echo of centuries speaking at once. When the rain ended, the cathedral shone darker, washed clean, renewed again by the simplest element. The city continued to change around it, new bridges, wider streets, taller buildings. But the cathedral never tried to match them. It remained what it had always been, a pause in motion. A reminder that stillness has its own kind of strength. Tourists came with cameras, artists with sketchbooks, pilgrims with folded hands. They all looked upward in the same way. Eyes following the curve of the arches, the light caught in the glass, the faint shimmer where shadow met stone. They may not have known each other, but within that moment of looking, they shared the same quiet awe. Centuries had turned into dust and echo. Empires had come and gone. Yet the cathedral endured, not through defiance, but through understanding. The deep knowledge that nothing must last unchanged to remain eternal. The cracks in the walls, the soot in the carvings, the softened edges of each step. These were not signs of age, but of life continuing at the pace of patience. And when the sun set over the Seine and the sky turned the color of old glass, the last light of day slid across the facade and lingered, as though reluctant to leave. For even the light seemed to understand that this place was its home, a vessel that had carried it through the centuries without asking for anything in return. So the bells still answer the sky, and the glass still breathes its colors onto stone. The city moves, but the cathedral listens. And within that listening, there is peace, the slow endurance of light that no shadow can unmake. Top of form.
Bottom of form.
Top of form. The heart that endures. Through the long corridors of time, through years of light and shadow, the cathedral endured. It did not fight, it did not demand, it simply remained a calm presence against centuries of change. Wars came and passed like weather. Fire swept through its roof, leaving char and silence behind. Yet even then, beneath the smoke and ruin, the bones of the building stayed steady. The air within still held the memory of bells. The light, fractured and faint, still found its way through broken glass. The endurance of Notre Dame was never born of miracle or myth. It was made of care, the slow, unseen labor of countless hands. Masons, carpenters, glassworkers, cleaners, each returned to the same rhythm, the same quiet promise, that what has been made with patience deserves to be tended with the same. Even in the centuries when no wars raged, time itself was enough of a challenge. Rain, wind, frost, they worked on the stone like sculptors. The walls absorbed it all without protest. They did not resist. They adjusted, shifting just enough to survive. That too was a kind of wisdom. Every era has left its mark. A cracked arch repaired, a statue replaced, a new bell hung in the tower. And each change, though small, was part of the same long heartbeat. The building never remained frozen. It aged as living things do, gracefully with quiet acceptance. At dawn, the windows bloom again. Their colors are softer now, tempered by centuries of light. Blue carries the depth of oceans once seen. Red glows like the memory of ember. Gold hums faintly, like the voice of sunlight remembered from youth. As the sun rises, the interior brightens by degrees. Stone first, then glass, then air. The cathedral becomes a breathing thing again. Outside, the river moves at the same pace it always has. The water mirrors the towers, steady, pale, eternal in reflection. Boats drift by, their wakes tracing faint ripples that vanish beneath the bridges. The city stirs, and for a moment, the sound of life folds perfectly into the silence that rests between the cathedral's walls. It has stood through empires, through revolutions and fires, through laughter and mourning. It has watched the human story unfold and has learned not to judge it. Its endurance is not defiance, it is understanding. The cathedral knows that everything moves, that everything fades, and that stillness is a form of strength. Inside, the air smells faintly of dust and wax. Candles flicker, tiny, trembling suns set in the cool shadow of stone. Footsteps echo softly on the worn floor. Every step feels familiar, as though 1,000 before had walked the same path, each one adding to the quiet memory of the place. Some come to pray. Some come to look. Some come only to rest. But all, without realizing, move slower once they enter. The vastness invites calm. The high arches lift not only the ceiling, but the heart. There is no rush here. Time has learned to unfold gently. The bells measure the day, but never command it. Their sound rolls like breath, a reminder that motion and stillness are never truly apart. When fire once took its roof, the city wept, but even then, beneath the burning timber and falling ash, the towers stood. They did not collapse. Their endurance came not from defiance, but from balance. Stone placed upon stone, each piece trusting the next. When the flames finally died, the silence that followed was deep and full. It was not despair. It was the sound of continuation. And so they began again. The builders returned. New scaffolds rose beside the old ones. Once more, hands reached upward, steady, careful, unhurried. They worked not to restore what was lost, but to continue what had never stopped. The same patience that had built it once was summoned again. To rebuild is not to start over. It is to listen, to the stone, to the past, to what still hums beneath the ruin. In every sound of hammer against beam, there is gratitude and the quiet understanding that nothing made with devotion is ever truly lost. The cathedral's strength is not only in its structure, but in the calm that fills it when everything else fades. Its stillness absorbs the city's noise, softening it, turning it into something musical. To stand near it is to feel that hush, that slow, patient pulse of endurance. At midday, when the sunlight spills down the river, the towers glow pale gold. Their shadows stretch long across the square, touching the cobblestones where centuries of footsteps have left their smooth, rounded marks. Pigeons settle on the spires, and the air hums with quiet continuity. Inside, a few voices rise in song. They echo upward, circling the vaults, folding back into themselves. The sound is small, but it fills the space completely. For a moment it feels as if the entire city breathes in unison. One long, peaceful exhale. When evening falls, the cathedral darkens to silver. The last rays of sun slide across the windows, leaving traces of color in the air. The river turns to glass. The bells ring again, their tones deep and slow, reverberating like the heartbeat of time. Night gathers, the doors close. Inside, the quiet deepens. Dust settles in soft spirals. The light from candles trembles, then steadies again. The towers watch the city sleep. In the hush of midnight, the cathedral becomes almost invisible, a shape of shadow, a memory held within the dark. But even then, its presence does not fade. It endures in the rhythm of the city, in the reflections on the river, in the faint vibration of bells long after they've stopped. Notre Dame remains. Not as monument, not as memory, but as the slow, steady heartbeat of a city that continues to breathe. It does not ask to be remembered. It simply is. A companion to time, a witness to change, a keeper of the quiet balance between loss and renewal. And so the story continues. Each morning, the light returns. Each evening, the shadows stretch, the river flows, the bells speak, and within their echo, the heart of the cathedral beats, softly, endlessly, at the pace of patience. Top of form. Bottom of form, top of form.
Bottom of form, top of form.
The calm seas of the Pirate Queen. The rise of the tide. Beyond the reach of empire, where the horizon softens into mist, the sea begins to breathe. Its rhythm is old, a steady pulse of tide and wind, endless, patient, and sure. Here, among boats that drift like thoughts across water, a girl begins her quiet ascent. Her world is not built of stone or crown, but of wood, rope, and salt. The ocean is her ground, and the air itself her inheritance. In the floating markets of southern China, boats press close together, their hulls creaking softly with the swell. Lanterns swing over the decks, their reflections trembling across the dark surface. Voices call from one vessel to another, not loudly, but with rhythm, as if conversation must move with the same pace as the tide. Here, trade is not only about goods, it is about trust. A barrel of rice is exchanged for silk, a spool of rope for dried fish. Hands meet briefly, and the deal is done without word. Everything flows from shore to ship to sea, from sea back to shore again. Among these drifting villages, the girl learns to listen. Her eyes follow the wind across the water. Her hands grow sure with the weight of nets and the pull of knots. She learns when to speak and, more importantly, when to stay silent. Patience becomes her first language. The elders of the floating city say that the sea rewards stillness. Those who rush against it are swallowed. Those who wait learn its secrets. And so she waits, through storms, through hunger, through long nights of endless sound. She learns the smell of coming rain, the taste of wind before dawn, the way light moves through mist when a storm begins to fade. The world she knows is made of movement, yet nothing feels hurried. Boats drift, nets lower, anchors rise, even the gulls circle without haste. The rhythm of the water is the rhythm of life. Every wave carries a story. Every silence, a lesson. From the fisherman, she learns strength, not the kind that conquers, but the kind that endures. From the traders, she learns patience, the art of holding back, of choosing when to give and when to wait. From the women who mend sails and weave baskets, she learns care, the slow, deliberate craft that keeps a world afloat. Years pass quietly. The small boats that once floated apart begin to draw closer. The market grows. The voices multiply. And slowly, without command or declaration, the sea begins to recognize her. She is not a ruler yet. She is a listener, a keeper of rhythm. But even the tide seems to move differently around her boat. It bends. It waits. Those who work the same waters begin to follow her lead, not from fear, but from the calm assurance that she knows when to move and when to rest. She speaks little. Her authority is quiet, her confidence unspoken. When others argue over wind or direction, she stands at the stern and watches the current, her gaze fixed not on what moves, but on what remains still beneath. The ocean has its own mind. It gives without promise and takes without warning. But she learns to read it, not as something to be controlled, but as something to be understood. In her silence, the water finds a mirror. In her patience, it finds its equal. The traders begin to speak her name, Zheng Yiso. The words pass between ships like a tide of sound. They say she was once a market girl. They say she was chosen by the sea itself. They say that wherever her boat drifts, the storm calms just enough for passage. She does not claim these stories. She lets them move as the wind does, freely, without resistance. Her strength does not come from belief, but from balance. Every decision she makes follows the same rule. Move with the rhythm, never against it. When storms rise, she does not shout. She waits for the break in the wind, the soft breath between the gusts. That is when she acts. A single word, a tilt of the sail, a signal from her hand, and the boats follow. The floating city expands. Boats that once competed now travel together. Families from distant coasts join the fleet. They trade not only goods but protection, information, and loyalty. Without decree, without ceremony, she becomes their center. The sea begins to take her shape, not in dominion, but in reflection. It mirrors her composure, her restraint. Even in chaos, there is order. At night, the water turns to black glass. Lanterns shimmer across its surface, each one a small moon trembling with light. From her deck, Zheng Yi Sao watches the horizon fade. The world feels both endless and close. The wind moves softly through her hair. Below, the sea hums its low, patient song, the same song it has always sung. When dawn comes, the mist lifts and the fleet is revealed. Dozens of ships rise and fall with the tide, their sails folded like wings at rest. Each one waits for her signal. She does not raise her voice, she simply nods, and the movement begins. It is not command, it is rhythm. Each ship turns as if following an unseen tide, each wave carrying them in quiet unison. The fleet glides forward, slow, deliberate, complete. There is no flag yet, no empire, no written rule, only water and will, and both, in their own way, belong to her. Years will pass. The name Zheng Yi Sao will grow larger than the horizon itself. But for now, she remains part of the sea's long, slow heartbeat. The ocean watches her rise as it has watched the rise of winds, of empires, of stars. It knows that all things move in circles, that every tide returns, that every storm passes, and that every calm begins with silence. For now, she drifts among her people, her fleet of small boats gathering like constellations in water. The air is thick with salt, the light soft as dawn. Nothing announces the change that has already begun. But somewhere beneath the waves, the current shifts. It flows toward her, quietly, steadily, as if the sea itself has chosen a new rhythm. And that rhythm bears her name: top of form.
Bottom of form.
Bottom of form. Top of form, the empire of waves. The fleets grew vast. Across the horizon, sails stretched like wings catching the light. The air was full of low murmurs, wood creaking, ropes tightening, water shifting against hulls. Each ship moved with purpose, yet without haste. They were part of a larger rhythm, a pattern that seemed to breathe with the tide itself. Thousands followed her now, men and women from coasts and rivers, sailors who once fought over scraps of sea, now moved together, not from fear, but from a shared understanding. Her presence steadied them. Her calm shaped their motion. She ruled from silence, not spectacle. There were no grand speeches, no raised banners shouting her name, only gestures, glances, and the quiet certainty that order had taken root. Her laws were simple: respect, restraint, fairness. They were not written on scrolls, but carried in memory and action. Those who broke them met consequence, swift, measured, final. Those who kept them found safety that few seas had ever known. It was said her fleets could stretch from one horizon to the next. Hundreds of ships, junks, fishing vessels, and great war barges, each marked by discipline and balance. They moved not as scattered crews, but as a single body of water, flowing where she directed, resting when she chose. The sea, once wild and uncertain, began to breathe with a new kind of order. The chaos of wind and wave found rhythm in her command. Even the storms seemed to wait for her signal. When she spoke, her words moved through the ranks like the tide, slow, inevitable, impossible to resist. Her captains were chosen not for their loudness, but for their steadiness. They learned to read the sky as she did, to sense the current before it shifted, to act without panic. Each decision, even in battle, was made with care, deliberate, almost gentle. The sea did not forgive haste, and neither did she. Her rule was not conquest, it was containment, a shaping of chaos into stillness. To outsiders it seemed impossible. To those within her fleets it felt natural, as if the ocean itself had accepted her rhythm. At night, her ships glowed softly with lantern light. The reflections shimmered across the waves like 1,000 moving stars. The fleet became its own constellation, an empire built not on land, but on the calm surface of the sea. Voices carried over the water in low tones, orders were given quietly, received without question. She slept rarely. When she did, it was to the sound of waves pressing gently against the hull, a steady lullaby of motion. Her thoughts moved with the currents, never still, yet never restless. She knew that command was not a crown, it was a balance between control and surrender. Empires on land began to notice. From far ports and palaces, rulers watched her fleets gather and disperse. They sent envoys offering treaties and gold, or warnings wrapped in courtesy. None knew how to approach her. Was she a pirate, a queen, a myth? The sea did not answer. It kept her secret. Even her enemies spoke her name with care. They feared her reach, but more than that, they respected her stillness. Where others ruled through noise, she ruled through rhythm. Her power was quiet, but absolute. She understood something the empires did not, that true strength comes from harmony. Her fleets did not exist to dominate, they existed to endure. Each voyage was measured, each conflict avoided unless necessary. When she fought, she did so like the tide, arriving without warning, departing without trace. The sea closed behind her as if nothing had ever happened. To her people, she was not a conqueror. She was balance itself. She offered them what no empire could, predictability in a world of storms. Her law was simple enough to remember, but deep enough to hold them together. And through it all, she remained quiet, a steady center in the motion of thousands. When disputes arose, they came before her, not with shouting, but with lowered eyes and calm words. She listened, then spoke few sentences, each one final, each one fair. Justice, to her, was another kind of navigation. You followed the compass and trusted it would bring you home. The empire of Zheng Yi Sao was built not on conquest, but on continuity. Each ship reflected her way of being, organized, efficient, serene. Her fleet was not just a force, it was a community floating between worlds. The markets she once knew still followed her, though now on a grander scale. Barrels of rice and salt, silk and oil passed from ship to ship like tides of trade. Coins changed hands quietly. The sea, under her watch, became not only a highway for power, but a lifeline for those who lived by patience and balance. Her command spread across the South China Sea like ink across parchment, slowly, beautifully, without blur. The map changed shape beneath her influence, though she never sought to draw it herself. She did not need to see boundaries. The water told her where she was strong, and though she commanded thousands, she never forgot the small boats from which she came. The creak of oars, the smell of rain, the soft slap of waves against hulls, these were still her language. Her power, vast as it had become, remained rooted in that simple beginning, the art of listening to the sea. Now, when storms gathered, her fleets did not scatter. They closed ranks, their sails folding in unison, their anchors descending in quiet harmony. And when the skies cleared, they moved again, not with haste, but with the certainty of those who trust the tide. Her empire was made of movement, yet it was the stillness within that movement that made it strong. Every current followed her law. Every wave knew her name. Zheng Yi Sao had turned the sea itself into a mirror, reflecting her patience, her clarity, her unshakable calm. Top of form, bottom of form, top of form, bottom of form, top of form.
Bottom of form.
The shore of stillness. When the kingdoms turned against her, the sea was calm. The horizon remained wide and pale, as if unaware that history had begun to move again. Messages crossed the water, sealed letters, cautious envoys, ships that carried more tension than trade. Empires that once ignored her fleets now spoke her name in whispers. They had watched her for years, uncertain whether she was threat or tide. Now they gathered their courage and sent their demands upon the wind. She listened. Always she listened first. Where others prepared for battle, she prepared for silence. Conflict, she knew, was noise, and noise never lasted. In her cabin, the maps lay open. Lines of ink traced the shape of the world she had tamed. The coasts, the bays, the deep water channels that held her ships like memory. Every mark was familiar, every route carried a story. She touched them as one might touch the edge of a page long read. The choice came quietly. She could fight and vanish in fire, or she could speak and remain. She chose the second path, not from fear, but from understanding. When the envoys arrived, she met them not with sword or fleet, but with presence. They found her seated in the open air, the sea behind her, the sound of wind and wave steady between every word. Her tone was calm, measured as the tide. She spoke of trade, of peace, of boundaries. Her arguments were not pleas, they were simple truths. Empires, like storms, must break and pass, but the sea, and those who know how to move with it, endure. The men across from her shifted uneasily. They had come expecting fire, expecting the defiance of a pirate. Instead, they found quiet logic, soft-spoken certainty, and the deep patience of someone who had already outlasted them. In the end, they agreed, it was easier to call her ally than enemy. Her fleets would disband, her people would go free, no prison, no chain, no gallows, only the slow dissolving of power, a tide receding, leaving the shore clean. And so, for the first time in many years, Zheng Yi Sao stepped onto land. Her feet met the earth as though rediscovering gravity. The sound of waves followed her, soft, constant, and kind. The sea, her companion for a lifetime, did not rage or mourn. It simply moved, folding and unfolding in its endless rhythm, as if whispering, "You remain in me." The years that followed passed quietly. The fleets that once stretched across the horizon became stories told in markets and ports. Sailors spoke of her discipline, her silence, her command. Fishermen told their children that the sea itself had once bowed to a woman who never raised her voice. She did not seek wealth or throne. Her home was small, its windows open to the sound of surf. From her doorway, she could see the silver line of the tide, the same line that had once followed her across the world. Morning light reached her table. The smell of salt drifted through the air. Each day began without demand. Sometimes she sat by the shore and watched the waves return. Each crest folded into the next, each foam trail vanished back into the blue. She saw in it the reflection of her own life, motion without struggle, power without noise. Those who passed her on the beach did not know her story. To them, she was only an older woman, quiet and unhurried. But the sea knew. It recognized her shape, her rhythm, her breath. When the wind shifted, it moved around her gently, as if remembering command. Her legend continued without her effort. In distant ports, men raised cups and spoke her name softly, not as a warning, but as a memory. Zheng Yi Sao, the woman who ruled the South China Sea without ever shouting. The maps changed again, empires rose and fell, ships came and went, but the law of balance, the one she had carried within her, remained as constant as the moon above the tide. In the quiet of her final years, she found peace, not in victory, but in stillness. She had shaped the sea once, but now she simply watched it move. Every wave that touched the shore felt like an old friend's greeting. At dusk, the sky turned soft and golden. The water reflected the last light of day, as it always had, slow, shimmering, without end. Children played where her ships had once anchored. Fishermen cast nets into the same depths that had once carried her empire. Life continued, and that, she thought, was the truest kind of success. When night settled, the wind carried the low hum of the tide. The rhythm was unchanged, steady, patient, familiar. It was the same rhythm that had once moved her fleets, the same rhythm that had guided every choice she made. The sea no longer needed her, and she no longer needed the sea. Their story was complete. A long conversation between water and will, ending in mutual quiet. Her name faded from the lists of kings and captains, but it remained in the waves themselves. In the way they curved, in the way they breathed. Her legacy was not carved in stone, but carried in motion. And when the last light touched the horizon, the ocean shone faintly, as if bowing once more before its calmest ruler. Zheng Yi So watched the sea, and the sea, in its endless patience, watched her back. Together they understood that all power, like tide, must one day recede, and that true mastery is the ability to let it go without sound. When the stars appeared, their reflections trembled on the surface of the water. The waves moved as she once ruled, steady, endless, free, top of form, bottom of form, bottom of form, top of form. The night deepens once more, the wind softens, moving through spaces once filled with voices and flame. Across kingdoms and oceans, across centuries of stone and sail, the same quiet endures. From the low hum of a medieval tavern to the distant hush of desert wind over pale ruins, from the shimmer of terraces beneath the moon to the calm expanse of the sea that carried a queen. The rhythm has never truly changed. It is the rhythm of breath, of hands that build and mend, of hearts that rise and rest. Time moves, yet the stillness beneath it stays the same. In every age, someone learns the art of calm, the patience of stone, the persistence of water, the grace of knowing when to yield. What was once noise becomes memory. What was struggle becomes rhythm. The crowns fade, the sails lower, the fires dim, but the balance remains. Somewhere beneath all motion, beneath every echo of history, the quiet continues, endless, gentle and kind. It waits in the pause between waves, in the hush after song, in the slow return of the tide. It asks nothing, demands nothing. It simply exists, the still heartbeat that has carried every story home. So rest now. Let the centuries settle. The night holds you as it held them, steadily, patiently, until even time itself sleeps. Top of form, bottom of form.